Hi, Harsha. Hello.
I can hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, awesome.
Am I in?
Yes, I can hear you. Is this Lester speaking?
That's right.
Hello everyone, Caleb here.
Okay. Um, Here, we'll give it a couple more minutes just to, let everybody get on.
Hi everyone, Caleb here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Caleb.
Oh, great.
I can hear you.
Caleb, thank you for joining.
All right, great. Thanks, Chooks.
Honorable, I can please.
Are we on?
Yes, we're about to get started. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'm just.
Mhm.
It's very quiet out there. I see there's still a lot of mute buttons.
Okay. Well, can everybody hear me? Hello?
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's get this thing started. Everybody, I am Carter Bell. Sorry, I'm still not able to be heard by everybody. Just one sec. Hey, everybody, we're having just some audio difficulties. Not everybody is able to hear me. So it shouldn't be a problem. We'll just work on it for the next 3 minutes, and then we'll officially start this thing at 10:10, if that's
Carter,
okay. Yes.
Carter, I think you can start. The problem is on their side because
Okay.
from everybody else we can hear you. So if anybody's having audio problems, it's on their side. If we
Okay.
start having audio problems, I'll just send you a text message. But it's on their side to resolve, not from your side.
Okay. Well, sounds good. Well, I'll get this thing started. Well, hey, everybody. As I said, I'm Carter Bell. I am currently a junior at Harvard University. I'm studying neuroscience, and I'm here to moderate this discussion on climate change in Africa. Um, so, thousands of studies have indicated a global increase in temperature on the Earth's surface, atmosphere, and oceans. Such changes have led to higher temperature extremes, more frequent heavy precipitation events and flooding, the melting of glaciers and snow covers, prolonged growing season, and alterations in the development and migration patterns of species. Climate change has not only had a detrimental impact on the Earth's environment, but humans have also suffered from its effect. More frequent drought events and change yield and thereby economically disadvantaged African farmers. More severe flooding has brought about increasingly expensive and harmful damage and trauma to African countries. High temperature extremes and poor air quality have led to overall deterioration of Africans' health. Yes, so that's just the introduction on our webinar today. Africa is feeling the heat. So we have a few speakers here today that are going to answer some questions and discuss climate change in Africa. The first of which is Leicester Malgus. Leicester, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, sir.
Fantastic.
Yes, so Leicester Malgus is an academic researcher with a background in journalism and strategic communication for civil society and development sectors, spanning environmental, cultural, youth, and disability issues. He has significant international experience working on climate change and sustainable development issues, and has presented and facilitated at various international conferences, including the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In 2006, he represented Climate Action Network International as expert reviewer to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Fourth Assessment Report. He has also served in various office bearer positions on the board of the South African Climate Action Network. His current academic research explores environmental discourses in English literature with a specific focus on science fiction, Afrofuturism, and African ecological issues, along with presenting environmental and sustainability studies lectures for the UWC Biodiversity and Conservation Biology Department. He serves in the role of Green Ambassador at the Office for Student Leadership Support's Green Campus Initiative. Thank you for joining us, Leicester.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Next on the list, we have Caleb Adebayo. Caleb Adebayo is a lawyer at Templars, a leading law firm in Nigeria, where he works on the energy and project scene, advising on and structuring deals at the intersection of energy, environmental law, and finance. Prior to working at Templars, he worked at two leading Nigerian law firms. Caleb is also the founder and project manager at EarthPlus, an environmental nonprofit organization delivering sustainable environmental solutions across Africa. Caleb is a fellow of the Barack Obama Young African Leaders Initiative, Regional Leadership Center Fellowship, an alumnus of Carrington Youth Fellowship, and current mentor for the 2019 Fellows of Fellowship and a Fellow of Climate Tracker. He has also been named one of 20 peace builders in Africa by the United Nations Alliance of Civilization and was one of 50 delegates to the African Union AGYI Ideation Forum. Caleb has spoken at various events on the theme of energy and environmental law, including the annual Youth Energy Summit, the Pollution Conference, the Sustainability Table Discourse, and the African Bar Association Conference in Nairobi, Kenya. He was also a speaker at TEDx OAU in 2018. In 2018, he won the JCI 10 Outstanding Young Persons of the Year for Environmental and Moral Leadership. He is an alumnus of two flagship programs of the Lagos Business School, Pan Atlantic University. He has written widely on the subject of energy and environmental law. Thank you for joining us, Caleb. Can you hear me okay?
Thank you very much.
Okay. And the last speaker I will introduce to you today is Hakima El Ait. Am I saying your name correctly? Hakima, can you hear me? Dr. Hakima? Dr. Hakima, are you on? Dr. Hakima, are you on? Okay, it sounds like Dr. Hakima was not able to make it today. Without further ado, thank you guys, thank you Caleb, and thank you Leicester for joining us. We'll go asking you some questions. How this thing will go is I'll ask you some questions that we have for you, and then we are going to, after we do that, we'll take some questions for the audience. So without further ado, we'll start out with this question. What do you predict will be the most detrimental effect of climate change on the African continent or within each region of Africa?
All right. I'll go first. I'll speak first for where I live. I live in Cape Town. And South Africa specifically is, is a water-stressed region. Over the last few years, Cape Town, even though it's a very cosmopolitan and coastal city, it suffered from severe water shortages. So, there are severe knock-on effects from increased water shortages, especially for the agricultural sector in South and Southern Africa, especially on the western side of the country. Um, you know, I can't speak so much for other effects, but I do know that you know on the projections in terms of these climate models that are currently being produced, if the world experiences a 3% increase in 3 degrees increase in temperature, um, the increase in Africa is likely to be 1.5 times that. So we then in Africa we're looking at like a 4.5 degrees Celsius increase, and when you speak about increased heat, then you're talking about an increase in vector-borne diseases. You're talking about a lot of agricultural adaptation that needs to take place. You also, you know, you're talking about water shortages, and I think that's from there you're going to other social and social issues that from these difficulties. I won't go much further than that, but I think that's what I want to register for now.
Oh, thank you, Lester. Caleb, do you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, so Lester has spoken well. So I the most detrimental effect of climate change on the African continent, speaking specifically now with reference to Nigeria and a couple of the countries in West Africa, is the agriculture. We're mostly a rain-fed economy, and there's a lot of agriculture happening in Nigeria and in West Africa. A number of average and the not too wealthy people are doing subsistence farming. And then, of course, we have the farming happening at larger scales. And a lot of the food that's being produced is dependent on weather patterns, rainfall, sunshine, and all of that. Um, we see what is happening with Lake Chad and how uh, the drying up of what to be a lake has affected livelihoods, has affected the people who live there, has affected the food, the fish, and whatever it is that they would get from the area. And so this is a big challenge when it comes to the effect of climate change on the African continent, because as the continent that is known for its agricultural exports, known for rich land and wildlife, it's a problem if we cannot sustain food, the food that goes through the food chain. Essentially, food security then becomes a problem, and where food security is a problem, people are hungry, people are um, malnutritioned. It affects their health. It affects, of course, security too, because when people cannot feed, they then begin to find other ways, alternative ways of finding food. It causes a lot of unnecessary immigration. So people who are not supposed to be places begin to move towards those places. Then we see the constant challenge between herdsmen um, and farmers, because the herdsmen want to get fodder for their flock, and the farmers, the ones being affected because herdsmen no longer have pasture where they used to have pasture, so they're coming into the country lands to get more pasture for their flock, and then affecting the farmers in that respect. And of course, in a number of the crops that are very easy to grow cannot survive changing weather patterns, and that's a problem with respect to food security. So I think that the most detrimental effect of climate change on the African continent, as much as there are a number of them, and it's sad that it's so, because the continent contributes only about 4% to the global warming globally. But the problem is we bear the brunt of it because of a number of reasons. So I think the most detrimental effect will be on our agriculture and food security within the continent.
All right, thank you, Caleb. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that can be very scary to talk about. So, is it too late to prevent climate change? And if so, what should be our next step to prevent or prepare for the negative effects of climate change?
Go first, Caleb.
Is that for me or Leicester? Or
Both of you guys.
I'm going to let you
would
go
you like?
first this time.
Okay, all right. So is it too late to prevent climate change? Okay, so the word prevent is what I would try to tweak a bit. Climate change is already happening, so maybe prevent is not the right term I would use, but it's not it's to mitigate and adapt. So if so, what should be our next step? What our next step should be activities, innovation, conversations around adapting and mitigating the negative. On the one hand, we're working to reduce emissions to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is an ambitious plan, but nothing that we cannot reach if we work towards it. Now, while this work is going on, we need to, I just spoke about agriculture and how we're having plants that cannot withstand, are not resilient enough to withstand the climate change, the climate change. The question then becomes, how are we beginning to adapt to that situation? How are we how we now beginning to develop seeds that can withstand, that are resilient enough? How are we using science and technology? How are we beginning to use understanding topography to say, okay, we understand that coffee can no longer be planted on lowlands because of the rains and the floods and the changing climate. Maybe we'll take it to more higher, more lands that are a bit hilly, so we can plant it there and it would not be affected by these. If we understand that we're having water in this place, how can we ensure that we do some irrigation so we can bring water into this place, and then we would have solutions for the crops that we plant there. So it's not too late to mitigate or adapt. That's the steps that we're taking every day. That's the steps that countries of the world are constantly discussing under the Paris Agreement and all the actions that are to come under it. That's what each country is working to say, let's achieve under our nationally determined contributions. And so, no, it's not too late. It's never too late to work towards ensuring a world that is low carbon, ensuring a world that is clean, ensuring a world that climate change is not proving a battle that we cannot win, because indeed it's a battle we can win as long as we adapt and again mitigate. So in the situations where we can ensure that the effects of climate change do not happen to us, how do we prepare for it? For my country now, Nigeria, we understand certain areas are prone to flooding in recent times due to climate change. So how do we prepare for it? How do we ensure that people who live in these places are told, okay, these places are prone to this, or we've done surveys, we've done research, in 6 months, in 1 year, this place will probably covered in water? How can we move you to better places? How can we ensure that there are systems in place to prevent the damage that will come to your livelihood, to your work, to your health? So there's work that is to be done. This work will involve thinking outside the box, thinking forward, thinking with technology and innovation in mind, thinking with research and data available, understanding that we cannot wait for the effects of climate change before we start working. We have to work ahead to say, how can we mitigate? How can we adapt? How can we make sure that life is still as good while we fight this battle to reduce our emissions to below 1.5 degrees Celsius?
Um, I think Caleb is more optimistic than I am. My answer would have been yes, it's too late. But he makes all the right points. My experience is also that the vast majority of action on climate change is divided into two streams. The one is mitigation, meaning the reduction of greenhouse gases through. Hello?
Hello.
Can everybody hear me?
I hear you.
All right. Okay. So, as I was saying, mitigation, which is the reduction of greenhouse gases, whether through renewable energy, energy efficiency, and other means. And then the other stream is what is called adaptation, and which Caleb has also mapped out quite clearly, saying that whenever we find that um, you know, conditions will change and will be detrimental to a particular crop, we need to look at, what crops or what, what species of crops might be better suited to the way that the climate is changing for a particular region. Now, adaptation focused on agriculture is, it's often best informed by local knowledge. People who have been working on a particular agricultural activity for some time and in a particular area for some time, their voices need to be included in any type of action that's, that's considered in terms of adaptation for that particular region. There's another type of adaptation, however, that is largely informed by very technical group of people, town planners and such, and these are infrastructural adaptive measures, and these types of measures present a critical challenge for many African countries because of the cost associated with it. So we can address, if not prevent, a vast majority of climate change impacts. That's not necessarily to say that we always have the finance or the political will to do so.
Oh, thank both of you. Thank you both for your input on that. It does sound like you guys are both in agreement that adaptation to the effects of climate change are, is probably the best step that we can take towards living with the effects of climate change. And this next question is one that you guys have already kind of touched on, but I just want to ask you again. so that you guys can give maybe more specific answers and stories. But how has global warming already affected your community, country, or region? And how has climate change affected Africa as a whole, economically and socially?
All right.
I think I'll let Leicester go first on this.
Thanks, Caleb. So in my country, as with Caleb, there's lots of agricultural impacts, and South Africa is a country that that exports, all its A grade agricultural product is exported, and the second grade agricultural produce is sold to the locals. But that's not necessarily a global warming issue. But what it points to, is something that that speaks to these economic and social, effects in Africa. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies. Our Gini coefficient is very close to 1, or perfect inequality. There's, we find that, as certain areas are affected by climate change, capital has sought to separate the haves from the have-nots. We've got people living in extreme poverty alongside people with great wealth, and the rise of gated communities, and sort of a brewing civil unrest. And environmental justice is sort of one vector of this particular type of civil unrest. I'd say that inequality is the major force behind it. Additionally, then, as I said, water shortages and also unequal access to services such as energy is a major issue associated with climate change in my country. Caleb, you up?
Thank you. I think the responses are going to be much similar. So specific examples, in Nigeria, we have instant and desertification in the north. States like Borno, Yobe, and a couple of states up in the Sahel region have been known to have the challenge of drought. Down here, I live in southern Nigeria. So down here in the south, and again, strange as it may sound, somewhere in Abuja, I recently heard instances of heavy flooding, even goes as far as covering cars, submerging the cars in the water. So we're having constant flooding, we're having drought, we're having desertification, we're having issues with the availability of water, and all these as a result of global warming. And again, I did research once and an article on the health effects of climate change, and I spoke to a couple of doctors as well who confirmed that with global warming comes certain illnesses, or the intensification of certain illnesses, or certain parasites that could not previously survive are then strengthened or have the ability to survive under these extreme weather conditions. And so it's entirely worrying because with the level of literacy and poverty and the state of our developing nation, it's then a challenge because we don't even have what we require to cope. The people affected most by it don't have the money, don't have the educational expertise, don't have the knowledge of what's even going on with. And so that's those are some of the effects. Economically, with desertification and drought and flooding, even the corporate world has been affected. I recall a number of times colleagues of mine at the office could not come into the office, could not attend meetings because just right in front of their house and their houses, it's all flooded. Right inside their houses, they're bailing water out of their sitting rooms and bedrooms, so the entire room doesn't get covered in water. And this definitely affects productivity, affects work, affects the and affects the corporate world entirely. With respect to socially, global warming, of course, the heat waves are another thing. We've had series of those. I recall mine while we were at the law school, a couple of them did their law school up north. I was lucky to have mine in Lagos. And for those who did up north, it was the heat waves were terrible. They could not hold classes beyond midday, beyond 12 noon. So once it's 12 noon, I mean, in Lagos, we held classes till 5, 6 p.m. I mean, because there was a lot to cover. And they could only stop at 12. And at 12, everyone had to just go back to their rooms because the heat was crazy, right? So there's the whole effect it has economically, socially. People are angry. People are. They're antsy because the environment is not conducive to them. So it's a real problem affecting each community, each country, and definitely African continent.
Like, just hearing both of you guys speak, that, climate change is already having a very real impact on, on Africa, on your communities. But, from what I've heard and from what I know, not a lot has been done to, take steps towards, making these adaptations to some of the things that are going on with climate change. So that brings me to this next question, which is, what is the biggest challenge to implementing feasible solutions to climate change?
Okay, maybe I'll take this first. So the biggest challenge, opinion, I mean, I want to, let me give it a 30-second thought, just so I'm clear that indeed that's what is the biggest challenge. But I think the political will is. I think the political will is because a lot is happening. A lot is actually happening. Organizations, private sector, non-profit, people are working day in, day out to provide solutions to climate change. But on the other side of the divide, we have the government, which is not aiding or not aiding enough or working at counter purposes to what is being done out there. In Nigeria, for instance, we are innovating around climate change, providing solutions, renewable energy, and a lot of things along the line. But we do not have a concrete legal framework in support of these guys. We don't have policies that help these guys, that provide that lift their businesses need, that provide um, tax credits, that provide access to uh, network, to infrastructure. We don't have those things. And so it's a challenge for someone who is saying, rather than stepping into the oil business, which is dirty, or rather than floating a coal plant, I want to do renewables. To start with, it's a bit expensive. I have to build the solar panels. I have to train people who would do the fitting together. I have to import whatever materials I have to. Everything, they are still being charged the same. In fact, the guys who are in the dirty businesses are even getting rebates because I've been in it for a while with the government. The government is familiar with they're the big players. You have, I mean, you still have in Nigeria the oil subsidies, but who is subsidizing renewable energy? Who is ensuring that these guys who are working daily to provide climate solutions are being there's funding made available for them. Is the infrastructure put in place, or at the very least, there is the law that is backing them. There is availability of policies, and not just the policies being there, but actually working to say these guys should be given this. These guys should have to, the growth of their businesses, and because in aiding them, you're aiding these solutions to become more large scale. And so you see small pockets of these things happening across, but then nothing happening on so much a large scale because there's not enough support from the government. So I think the government needs to begin to actually take this thing as real as it is. So you have, I mean, my government, for instance, were the United Nations General Assembly a few weeks back, and yes, indeed, there was that statement. We're supporting the climate solutions. We had the same thing at the previous conference of parties. But coming back home, it's a different story. We have big projects. We have big refinery projects. We have big coal projects starting in Nigeria as we speak. So then the question becomes, are we saying one thing outside and doing another inside? Are we really working towards our NDCs, or are we just going out there are we posturing? So there needs to be the political will to tell the big wig oil companies that, hey, this and these are happening from this time. And so if you have to adapt, you have to start adapting now. We're moving into this. We're supporting more of renewable energy products. We're supporting more of climate solutions. We're supporting investment that are climate based. We're giving we're supporting the floating of green bonds. We are supporting climate investment. We're educating or allowing nonprofits educate people about it. So I think it's either the government is going to help or at least move out of the way. So I think that's really the biggest challenge.
I can heartily agree with Caleb. I think political will is a key issue. In South Africa, the proper enabling environment for renewable energy projects to thrive has been, sorely missed. In Cape Town and in Durban, the local municipalities have been developing their own frameworks for providing subsidies to renewable energy projects, but they are up against our our biggest utility, which is Eskom in South Africa. Now, for many people, in terms of utilities, Eskom is the biggest greenhouse gas emitter in all of Africa, in terms of energy generation. And, they have, as Caleb has said, there are subsidies built into their business models, and the reform required is not something that is being pushed with enough zest at the government level. Now, a big problem at the government level, then this is certainly it's a big challenge, is that the time frames in which we obtain benefits from implementing solutions to climate change is longer than the time frames associated with political parties and getting elected and getting re-elected. So for many politicians and political parties, they are saying, well, I won't do this, I won't take this particular climate change action because the benefits won't show themselves by the time the next elections come along. So, and then they'll vote me out, and then what good will it do? I need to stay in power, so I will continue supporting the infrastructure that is already entrenched. Additionally, in government, as Caleb says, we go to the United Nations conference and we show a really progressive plan of what we're keen to do, but back home, that action is not actually being taken. And you've got the issue of different government departments working in silos, and not coming together to work together on finding climate change solutions. If I can add one further challenge, which is at work in Africa and elsewhere, it's climate denialism, and there are vested interests trying to, sow dissent on what is a scientific consensus. That's what I got.
Thank you both. Lester, I'm glad you made that final point there about people just being in denial of climate change. And that kind of leads us to our next question about how that denial and climate change has affected, the common people or everybody else. So how widespread is awareness about climate change in your country or region?
Okay, I'll start. I think that it's climate change as a concept. It's come a long way. I've been working on climate change issues since the early 2000s. I started in 2003 when I started working for an NGO working on greenhouse gas emissions projects, and then the general knowledge on climate change wasn't as good as it is now. Almost daily there's some or other climate change issue being shown on television. So a lot of people in my country and in the region know about climate change. However, that knowledge does not necessarily translate to action for the vast majority of people and individuals. As I said, we live in a very unequal society here, and the vast majority of people are sort of living on say let's not say less than $1 a day, but maybe less than $3 a day, if you want to. So for them, climate change is a problem that someone else should be sorting out. My business is to provide for myself and my family in whatever way that I can. So as much as there's an awareness about climate change in my country, the only time there's any type of action that goes along with that awareness is when that action is coupled with an ethic of environmental justice. Where communities are have had enough of living next to polluted rivers or mining sites and things like that. So yeah, that's about it with awareness about climate change in my country. Caleb.
All right. The awareness of climate change in Nigeria, I'd say it's growing. It's steadily growing. Maybe some 5 years ago, it wasn't this common. People didn't know what it was. But there's been a steady growth in advocacy, in publicity, in spreading the knowledge about climate change. People are suddenly becoming more conscious about the environment. Now, their consciousness or the fact that they know about it and whether they indeed believe it is now another matter, because there are a couple of people who, either because of religious biases or just their personal beliefs, they think either the fact that we have this crazy changing weather patterns at this time is that God has decided it to be that way. And for some others, they believe just it's going to happen at some point. Or for some people, they believe it's not just true. It's some theory brought about by the West. I mean, I've heard people repeatedly say this, that it's something the West has brought just to ensure that we don't develop. The knowledge is not as widespread as it should be, but it's a bit better. It's a bit better than it was before. People are becoming aware, even the farmers, because now with the agricultural organizations, both private sector and non-profit, alongside the normal things they will talk about or they would teach about, they're teaching about resilient cropping. We have climate change is a big problem to agriculture, to food security. So this is how we have to deal with it. And so whether or not they accept the is another matter, but the knowledge is spreading gradually and steadily, and that's a good thing, I think.
I thank you guys both for your input on that question. So as people are becoming more and more conscious about climate change and the effects of climate change, does then the onus go on them to come up with a solution or contribute to a solution for climate change? So are common people just as responsible as their governments for contributing to solutions for climate change?
Yeah. Okay, so that's the next question. Okay, so I'll just take it. So I think common people have a role to play. So at my organization, something we say is that our solutions are two-pronged. So we want to have a responsive government and responsible citizens. So if you have a government that's responsive enough to say we're going to put these in place so that those who are bringing climate solutions can thrive, then we have people who are responsible enough to say we are going to put in place these solutions. Then we have it working on both sides. So yes, they are just as responsible for contributing to the solutions of climate change. The government can only what they are supposed to do, which most of the time is just putting in place the environment, the enabling environment for these solutions to the law, the policy, the regulatory environment, the infrastructure, and then the common people, as you say, will then go ahead to develop these solutions in the small corners of their communities. Because the truth is, The solution for climate change would not be a down solution. It won't be a top down. It won't be something that will be formed at some big place and then trickle down. It would move from the communities, from feeder societies, from families, from small hamlets, and move up to cities, to the larger society, because each and I think Lester mentioned it, solutions have to be crafted according to the communities where they are. They have to be as indigenous as possible. So if in your community the solution to a particular thing is create or to climate change or global warming is saying we're going to use the materials we have around us to create stoves that do not use that use biogas, for instance, and the biogas materials are things we're sourcing from our community, things that people regularly dispose or throw away in this community. Then those solutions are being community specific, and then we then think of, oh, if the government has provided an enabling environment, we can then scale, we can then have access to these funds to scale. So yes, the common people are just as responsible as the government for contributing to solutions, and I think that's what we should think every day. How can we create solutions? How can we contribute to solutions? How can we, from our indigenous communities, think locally and say, okay, in my school, what solution can I bring to aspect of the problem of climate change? In my community, in this little place I am, in my city, how are we creating the solutions? So yes, indeed, common people are just as responsible.
Yeah, I agree with Caleb. I don't know about just as responsible. I think, it's up to individuals to take whatever action they can take, and the actions that we take as individuals, um, they often um, they often materialize in two forms. One of these is technological choices. Um, so in that paradigm, I can choose to cycle to campus, or I can choose to take public transport, or I can choose to drive with my car. Um, you know, these are choices that I can make, but along with that, there are also choices associated with behavioral change, and finding ways to do things that, if I have to. Something that's happened in Cape Town quite recently is like a lot of people have decided, well, most of our grey water, is just piped away from our houses, and a lot of people have decided, well, they want to capture their grey water and reticulate it to their gardens. So that's a behavioral change that's been happening here as a result of trying to deal with a climate change issue. When it comes to when it comes to you know the responsibility for climate change, there's something else at work. Having worked on energy and climate change in South Africa for some time, um, my my view is that if you look at energy consumption um, in South Africa, the residential sector um, is responsible for about 20%, which means that the remaining 80% is government, industries, and businesses. Um, so, I think that in terms of the choices that individuals can and common people can make, it's often dependent on what type of energy mix the government and industries are starting to enable. Um, but so a lot of times we are, we are, led to believe that it is, that it is primarily our consumer choices that you know that has that is the place where we can make the most where we can make the most progress and action. Um, so, but we are still led down a path that is very consumer driven in terms of what type of action as individuals we take to climate change. Um, I would say that that governments and industry have a huge leadership role to take, but as individuals and as a society, we have to hold them to account.
All right. Thank you for both of your answers there. So I want to open everything up to the floor. So anybody listening in can ask their questions in the chat box on the right side of your screen, and we'll ask them here. We already have a question from Vitoni Pamagala. Vitoni asked, we need human activities to go for the betterment of our society, but how can we stop such activities that bring changes to the living, though they influence climatic change?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Or can you put it on the screen?
Here. I don't know. So it's in the chat box. Are you able to see the entire chat for the webinar? I'll repeat the question. I don't know if I'll be able to get it on the screen.
All right.
But yeah, yes, Tony asked. Well, she stated that we need human activities so that society can continue to function, and some of these activities cause climate change. But how can we deal with climate change, or how can we adapt to a society where we no longer rely on these activities that can bring about climate change?
All right.
Okay. Okay.
You're gonna jump in, Caleb?
No, it's fine. Go ahead. I'll come in when you're done. Maybe just say maybe just let's hear you first.
Sure. So when I think about the activities, that Vitoni is talking about, yeah, for me, a large part of it is about the type of energy that we need. Or we need energy and we need mobility. Now, there are significant innovations that are currently being made in terms of renewable energy, in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of alternative motive power technologies, and as much as we need to cut down on what we don't need, we need to drive innovation in those areas that that speak specifically to where the biggest impact is that on climate change. So for me, my area of expertise is on energy and climate change, and there's a significant amount of progress and impact that we can make through existing technologies. But we need, as Caleb has mentioned earlier, the political will to, to make these renewable energy and energy efficiency technologies widespread. That's what I got.
I think you've spoken well. Vitoni, I get your question. That we need to continue our human activities to make society better. So then how do we balance development and sustainability? I think that's a question that has been asked for ages, really, for years now. How do we balance the development of especially developing countries and sustainability? Now, while it might not be the easiest thing to do, I think it's happenable. It's very possible. So the question is, does development have to be at the expense of the environment? And the answer is no. Which is why when I hear arguments that climate change is just the Western agenda, I ask the people who argue, leave the West out of this and think critically. Do you think the environment, your country, in my country, in the country we are, is being treated fairly? And they say no. And then I ask the question, so that's essentially what we're fighting. Do you think that the effects that we're seeing, the things that are happening now, do you think that they are supposed to be? Do you think that it's okay the way they are in terms of our environment? And if the answer is no, then the question is it okay for us to keep creating the problem simply because we say we have to develop? Which is why the concept itself of sustainable development and intergenerational equity is, let's live our lives, but let's also leave it in view of the next generation, such they can also have proper lives to live, such that they can also reap the benefits of this world we are enjoying today. And so we need to. The truth about sustainable development is that it's a bit more. It requires a bit more thought, opposed to development without concern for sustainability, where you just go and carry out an industrial activity just because you need to build something or do something. Sustainable development is thinking critically and saying, considering all the aspects, does this benefit the people economically, socially, and environmentally? Am I just empowering people economically and their environmental livelihood is suffering? Or am I empowering them socially and the environmental livelihood is suffering? So the question, it has to balance. It's an equation that has to balance itself out. We can't say that because we want to develop, we'll do it at the expense of society, because we have to constantly be thinking, how can we do this while still ensuring that the environment is preserved? And so with those questions, then come technology, come innovations, come out of the box thinking to say, oh, rather than do power through dirty energy, we can do power through clean energy. We can harness the power of wind. We can harness the power of the sun. We can harness the power of the waste that we throw away. So that's where the critical thinking then comes, and we begin to provide solutions. That's my take on this.
Thank you. So I was going to read off the questions from the chat box, but I'll go ahead and call out the everybody that's submitted a question in the chat box, and I'll let them introduce themselves, their questions themselves. So Igwe Martin, I don't know if I'm saying your name correctly, but do you want to unmute yourself and introduce yourself and ask your question? I might have to ask it for.
Hi, Kata. I didn't hear the last thing you said.
Okay, who is this speaking?
Caleb.
Oh, this is Caleb. So I was just going to open the floor to to questions, but I wanted people to call in and unmute their phones and introduce themselves and then ask the questions themselves. Yes. But one more time, is Igwe there? Do you want to ask your question? Okay, I'll just go and ask for Igwe. So, is it possible for victims of climate change themselves to initiate strategies to tackle the effects of climate change? Victims may have good opinion, but victim strategies guided by experience will be better.
Okay.
Take that question. Someone want to speak?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Igwe Martin, for your question. I think it's always a good idea that the victims of climate change are involved in the solutions, the process for bringing a solution to bear. And this is the reason, because they tend to understand it better. And so the advocacy has always been, let's have these guys who are taking the hit on climate change sit at the table. And I think that has been the reason why, in the recent conference of parties, you've seen more participation from small island states, because they get hit the most by these effects. So let's have them at the table, based on what you see, based on what you have experienced in the past. What do you suggest? So yes, I agree with you that victims should indeed be at the table when putting the strategies together, because often what we have are policies and strategies not guided by truth of situations. So people just sit down. People who have never been affected sit down in one room and decide, oh, this is a great strategy for this. Let's put it in place. At the end of the day, it's not working. So yes, I agree with you. Solutions by victims is a great idea.
I'd like to add something to that. I struggle with the idea of victimhood. I think that that couching any particular issue in terms of villains and victims creates a tension that doesn't move us forward. And but if not for the word victims, I wouldn't be speaking about this. That having been said, I totally agree with Caleb. I'm a big supporter in the power of local knowledge, and of people solving their own problems. With that having been said, when I think of the idea of victims of climate change, I'm often thinking of local communities that deal with international and that Western agenda that Caleb spoke about earlier. Basically a set of neoliberal policies that that drive privatization and works away from collective responses, and sometimes trying to deal with that type of problem as individuals is very difficult. Often we in Africa, we are at work against the lifestyle aspirations of people who look to the West for what that lifestyle aspiration is. I want 2 cars in my garage and and so many electronic devices and and I want to have holiday in the Bahamas, every second year. But we can't all live to that particular standard. So we are sometimes victims of ideas and aspirations that that have been sold to us, and that maybe, speaking from my own point of view, I didn't quite understand my victimhood for a long time before I realized, okay, well, I need to take responsibility for my own actions and try and help other people understand what their actions cause.
Thank you, guys. So Siboniso wanted to call in and ask a question. Siboniso, can you hear me? Can you hear us? And can you unmute your phone and ask your question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I just wanted perhaps maybe comment on the big challenge, which is noted as political one. And the reality is, when this decision, okay, I'm mentally, they need to be translated into the national conduciveness and uniqueness. And this being translated from one nation to another, for example, when we speak about climate change, we need to take issues, for an example, of labor, legal and social reform and to suit the agreement made in a global decision-making bodies. So in South Africa, as Eskom producing large energy for the country, for the Southern Africa, restructuring the revenue by global, because the circumstances and feasibility mechanisms in place at some stage might not meet the productive measures that the country consider legally, labor and social arrangement. So I think we need to rethink in a global decision-making stage. We need to see how uniquely and conducive it can be from one country to another. And that particularly has been the challenge that in cases gives countries to comply with agreements. So that was a viewpoint I just wanted to say.
I'd like to respond to that. Specifically about Eskom, I don't want to focus too much on South Africa and our problems, but I think that there are significant amounts of energy reform models, and there's significant experience around how parastatals or state-owned electricity utilities are unbundled into generation, distribution, and other in other sections. So the idea is that a utility like Eskom would unbundle so that your generation is split up between the main utility and a bunch of independent power producers, and then there's the second section would be what they call a single buyer, and then you have your transmission and distribution unit that sends it out to customers. There's a significant lack of political will to unbundle Eskom because ESCOM is no longer a state-owned enterprise. ESCOM is a private company where government is the major shareholder. And now private companies and state-owned enterprises have two different mandates. A state-owned enterprise is, its mandate is to provide a service for the consumer at the lowest possible price, energy in this case. But for a private company, its mandate is to provide value for its shareholder. And that just that slight difference. It's the same company, but it's just that shift in orientation creates a lot of difficulties in how our government and ESCOM interact. But thanks for that question.
Okay. Yeah, so next, Yushao, and Yushao M. Abu Bakar wanted to ask a question. How can we as a civil society ensure sustainable development in the African continent, considering lack of efforts and interest from the government side?
Hello. Okay, I can hear you. Mm. Thank you very much. Mm. Okay.
Yeah, so next we had, oh, thank you. We had Eric Edward who wanted to ask us a question. So Eric said, policy-wise, what is the role of the state to mitigate the impact of climate change, such as tax on urban CO2 production of companies and transportation? In some areas, also agricultural practices slash tropical forests and others inversely affects the environment, yet the system is made in place to improve the farmer's livelihood. And real quick, we only have time for two more questions after Eric's question. So, yes. Thank you for answering that question. Um, yeah, we'll move on to J Tawo's 64's question. Do you want to call in JT Tawo 64 phone and ask your question yourself and introduce yourself? I can ask it for you. So J Taiwo 64 asked, is that as far as climate change as layer and CFC contribute a great impact problem on our climate, and what is the solution to prevent this? Okay, and then one more question. Chooks wanted to call in and ask a question. Chooks, can you hear us? Okay, if not, I'll go on to Josh 256's question. Josh 256 asked, this will be the final question, by the way. Is the CO2 offset fund by developed countries to green African countries still a catalyst for positive environmental action? Oh, Josh, did you want to ask this question for yourself? And introduce yourself? Well, yeah, that's all that we have time for. Extremely grateful for the to share your thoughts and experiences with climate change in Africa. So while things don't look great right now, we do share with you an optimistic outlook on how things can go in the future with climate change. And it starts here. It starts with a discussion to get involved, to make people conscious about what's going on with climate change, so that we can make a difference in the future. So, guys, again, and thank you guys who attended this conference and provided your questions. We're all thankful for you. So thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Yes. Take care.
Bye to all. Thank you.